It's been a week since the 2022 NFL Draft, and after some time to think, I've come to realize that the draft showed a lot of good aspects of the Jets' long-term plan, and I'll tell you what they are on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, May 6th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, and I thank you for making the show your first listen or your first watch every day. A big shout out to subscribers to this podcast, and to join that group, just hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching. You'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps other Jets fans find the channel. Well, it has been about 1 week since the 2022 NFL Draft concluded. The draft took place last Thursday, last Friday, and last Saturday. And I always have initial thoughts, but I like to give myself a few days to really think about what the Jets did each year in the NFL Draft. Because once you get a little bit of distance, you have time to really kind of piece together what the thought process was. And I have to say, I was very happy leaving the draft last weekend. And the more I think about this, the happier I am. And I'll explain to you why. Listen, I am never going to be the person who guarantees you this player is going to be a superstar, that player is going to be a superstar. I'm not ready to, put Joe Douglas in the Ring of Honor at this point. What matters most is what is to come. But I think that there's a sound plan in place. And the thing about having a sound plan is it does not guarantee success, but the lack of a sound plan almost guarantees failure. And in past years, we've had a lack of a sound plan with previous general managers. And the more I look at the draft, especially in the context of the bigger offseason picture overall, the more I really like the direction the Jets are moving in. And the more I feel like the Jets, at least, I'm not going to guarantee you that they're building the next great Jets team, but you've at least given yourself a chance. And I think about all of the draft grades that have come out. And over the last few days, the Jets have been getting A's, some A pluses. I mean, the worst grades the Jets are getting are like A minus, maybe a few B pluses here or there. And when you think about it, I guess that's kind of obvious. I mean, with 2 picks in the top 10, with 4 in the top 36, 7 in the top 117, aren't you always going to get high draft grades in that situation? Because you've gotten a perceived inordinate amount of the top players in the class. Now, how these guys will perform on the field matters much more than immediate draft grades. Immediate draft grades are really silly. I always joke around on my website that draft grades are stupid unless they praise the Jets, because they really don't mean anything. So it was almost preordained that the Jets were going to get straight A's from all of the media analysts who studied this thing, because the Jets were always going to get like 4 of the consensus top 40 players. That was so. I mean, I see people talking about how amazed they are that the Jets are getting these good grades. Well, that was always going to happen. I think what the Jets should be praised for, rather than picking these guys who were the consensus top players in the class. I mean, listen, the Jets could have made some ridiculous moves. They could have drafted another Dexter McDougal. I guess I should not say it was guaranteed, because we've seen the Jets make some ridiculous picks before. But at the end of the day, you had to feel like going in. If you really thought this through, you had to feel like they were going to score pretty well in the draft grades. This is a case where process matters. It was the process that set them up, because when you have 4 top 40 picks, you're going to walk away, hopefully, with 4 of the top 40 players. It's more the planning, because getting those picks, that was really the big deal. That shows you the planning that was in place. And I can go back to the Jamal Adams trade in 2020. That was a move that was clearly a long-term move for this team. I said it at the time, and I'll say it now. Because the Jets traded who was then their best player, and now is completely fallen off the face of the earth as far as production goes. But they traded the guy who was an All-Pro, and at the time was their best player, and they got future draft picks in return for him. And this also happened at a point where the Jets were coming off an end of the 2019 season where they finished 6-2 over their last 8 games. And it would have been very easy for the people running the team to have read too much into that finish of that season, because that was kind of a mirage. When you look at the teams, the Jets did not beat many good teams in that stretch. In fact, in that 6-2 stretch, one of their 2 losses was to a then 0-11 Cincinnati team. But I mean, they had a tight win over Miami, a horrible Miami team that was determined really on a very suspect pass interference call at the last minute of the game. They had a narrow victory over Buffalo's backups week 17, the last game of the year when Buffalo had everything clinched and they didn't play any of their real players. They had kind of a back and forth win against a horrible Giants team. That was not a 6-2 finish that really showed you that team was moving forward in the right direction. And it would have been I see lots of front offices do this. They think that their team's closer than they are, and they go out and they make short-sighted moves. They make moves that maybe improve the team a little bit now, but hurt them over the long run. And it could have been tempting for the Jets front office to do that. They could have said, well, we won 7 last year. Maybe we add this player to a big contract, that player to a big contract. Maybe we can get to 10. But though that team did not have the fundamentals of a real 7-win team. That team was in many ways fortunate to get 7 wins. If you look at the offseason the Jets had in 2020, they were very modest in free agency. They did not think that they were at 7 and you just needed a player or 2 to get to 10. They made very modest moves. Now, they tried to improve certain areas, but they did not go all out because I think they realized the fundamentals of the team were not that good. And then you get to right before training camp, and you trade your best player because you get an incredible deal from Seattle. But you have to wait for those picks. You have to wait. You don't get to use them right away, which means you're going to hurt in the short run. But they got the picks because they knew it would be better for them in the long run. Last year, the trade of Sam Darnold, they got a 2 from Carolina. And this is one of the things I don't understand in the NFL, how future picks are devalued. Because there's always this perception that, and it varies by team, but a lot of teams will tell you, and so one of the ways teams value future picks is a pick next year is worth 1 round less than the pick this year. So, for example, Jets got a 2, and they also got a 4 and a 6 from Carolina. But that second round pick, it was viewed as less valuable in 2021 because you had to wait a year for it. So a lot of people would have viewed it, if you follow the way the NFL does things, they'd say a second round pick next year is worth a third round pick this year. Now think about this. From where we sit now, is that really a good way to value these picks? Would you have rather had a third round pick in 2021 or the second round pick in 2022? But this all plays into the idea of patience. The Jets traded Jamal Adams for future picks. The Jets traded Sam Darnold, and yeah, they had to wait a year for the best pick. They actually had to wait a year for the 4th round pick also. Would you rather have pick in round 3 and round 5 in 2021 or pick in round 2 and round 4 in 2022? They waited. And this all played into the way that the Jets handled things. Because it's always been about the long run. It's always been about building a team. And they've been aggressive in free agency the last 2 years, but you've not seen any of the mega deals. You have not seen any of the Trumaine Johnson contracts, the C.J. Mosley, the Le'Veon Bell contracts. You've seen a much more modest approach to free agency. And the Jets have tried to build slowly. Last year, they entered the season with the youngest team in the NFL. It's been a long-term approach. It's been a multi-year build because when Joe Douglas took over this job, he had a huge task in front of him because, first of all, he inherited a team that had just spent a record amount in free agency, which essentially tied up his finances for 2 years. So, first of all, he had the team was already built. I mean, his first year was 2019. The roster was already, it was after the draft. They had already spent all the money, but they had spent so much money in free agency that they really couldn't do a whole lot in 2020 unless they wanted to. I don't know if it was mortgage the future might be taking it too far, but they would have had to borrow money from future cap year. They would have had to borrow future cap hits and hurt the team in the long run in order to improve the team in the short. He decided not to do that. And this was kind of the culmination of all of this planning. And yeah, they had some bad seasons. 2020, the team was awful. But the thing is, the team was always going to be awful in 2020. Joe Douglas could have made some short-term moves to improve the team and maybe gotten it to 4 or 5 wins, but that would have come at the expense of 2022, 2023, because he would have had to borrow cap space from future years in order to do that, in order to go from 2 wins to 5 wins. It just did not make a lot of sense. And the Jets this year again last year entered the season 2021 with the youngest roster in the NFL. And yeah, they took their hits. They only won 4 games. And I'm not saying Joe Douglas has been perfect. The Jets could have won more games last year if Joe Douglas had done a better job. He has not done a good job in free agency so far. He's been more modest. His signings have largely not worked out, and the early returns on his draft picks have not been great. But it's really all been building to this draft because he's added all these extra picks. He's added the 2 additional first-rounders for Jamal Adams. He's added the extra pick for Sam Darnold. And now the Jets have a team where you have 7 either first or second-year players who were top 40 picks in their draft class. And these 7 guys, you want to throw Mekhi Becton in there, sure, feel free. You want to say there's 8? Then you have 8 top 40 picks drafted over the last 3 years. And this is the way you build in the NFL. This is not short-term thinking. This is building a young core. Now, whether the Jets are successful or not is going to come down to how good these guys are. How good will they be? I can't tell you at this. I have my suspicions that some of these guys are going to be very good. Others might disappoint you, and I have my thoughts on that, and I'll share those, I'm sure, as we approach training camp and get closer to the start of the season. But the Jets have set themselves up. This is the plan. The plan is in place, and the plan is finally being executed, and we may finally see the benefits of the plan. It took a couple of years. But when we praise Joe Douglas for the draft class, we shouldn't praise him because he got 4 of the top 40 players in a draft where he had 4 of the top 40 picks. We should praise him for having the vision, for having the patience to set himself up to have 4 top 40 picks, for executing the trades that he executed. And that's the type of thing that gives me faith in the team That's the type of thing that gives me hope for the team in the long run, because it shows that there's actually a plan here. I go back to that 2019 season. The Jets got off to a horrible start that year. That was the year Sam Darnold had mono. And I heard people say, well, you got to have patience. This is a long-term build. And this was off an off-season where the Jets had just spent a then record amount of money to bring in veteran players. It was a year where they had the third oldest roster in the NFL. And I'm sitting there saying, you're acting like this is a long-term rebuild. They just threw money. They tried to bring in as many veteran players as they could. That's not what they were doing. For over a decade, we've heard the word rebuild. And the Jets have never really committed to it. They've never really taken the steps to show that they have patience. They've never really taken the steps to commit to having a bad year or two in order to have greater success down the line. We've finally seen it. Whether or not it works, I don't know. But they've at least given themselves a chance to make this happen. They've given themselves a chance to turn this franchise around. So I'm happy with the process more than anything else as we look forward to the start of the 2022 season. But that's not the only thing I'm happy about. I think what the Jets did in the NFL draft shows a very distinct plan. It seems like they got the type of players that Mike LaFleur wants to run his offense. And I'll tell you more about that as we continue on this Friday episode of Locked On Jets. You may have been so focused on the NFL draft last weekend that you completely forgot that Mother's Day is coming up. In fact, it's this Sunday. But if you haven't gotten a gift yet, don't panic yet. Blue Nile has you covered. You can mark Mother's Day with something enduring. Classic diamond stud earrings, elegant tennis bracelets, birthstone pendants, and so much more at BlueNile.com. This Mother's Day, give Mom something she'll treasure forever with the fine jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off $500 purchases. This podcast exclusive is good through Mother's Day. Use code Locked On. Again, that's code Locked On. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDON. Plus, every order is insured. It ships free, and it arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside, so you won't have to worry about Mom accidentally finding her gift. Shop stress-free and find your forever peace. Go to BlueNile.com today. Again, that's BlueNile.com, BlueNile.com. NFL draft might be over, but you can still bet on football. You just go to BetOnline. They have bets about how the Jets will do this season. If you love what they did in free agency in the draft, you can go there and make some money. But you can also find the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball, and this weekend's Run for the Roses as the Kentucky Derby is back. You can also bet on the Stanley Cup playoffs. Congratulations to you Rangers fans out there for a big win last night. Pittsburgh can't figure out its goalie situation. You're probably moving on to the second round. And you should know that BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. No matter what you want to bet on, BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms. On today's show, I'm talking about some thoughts I have about what the Jets did in the NFL draft. And now that we're a week removed, I've had a real chance to think things through, think about the direction of the franchise. And I have to tell you, the more I think about it, the more I'm pleased with the direction the Jets are heading in. And part of this goes to what they did on the offensive side of the ball. And if you've been a listener through the offseason, you know that I was a fanatic about getting a veteran receiver because, to me, Zach Wilson's development's number one on this team. If Zach Wilson doesn't develop, we're not going anywhere. And I was very frustrated through much of the offseason as the Jets failed to land a veteran receiver. Some of this was not Joe Douglas's fault. There were rumors he was interested in Calvin Ridley, who got suspended for the season. Joe Douglas tried to trade for Tyreek Hill. That was actually one I didn't love. I got to be honest with you. Tyreek Hill, I felt was not the greatest fit in the world. He tried to get him, though, and it did not work out. There were areas where Joe Douglas is probably to blame. I look back to the beginning of the offseason. I think a lot of NFL general managers misread the receiver market, what was going to happen there. To me, it was clear things were going to go crazy. Christian Kirk signs with the Jaguars for a crazy contract. I think a lot of NFL general managers got caught sleeping, and I think about the Amari Cooper trade that went down. If Amari Cooper gets traded today, I bet you he goes for much more than the 5, but I think the perception was at the time Cooper had a $20 million contract. $20 million was pricey. $20 million was pricey for the old market. $20 million, not so much in today's NFL. The NFL of a month or two later. That's what's happened to the receiver market. And as we got closer to the draft, I actually thought there was a chance the Jets were going to get Deebo Samuel. But it became clear that the Jets were going to need some sort of plan B because they may not be able to get that number one type receiver that I felt Zach Wilson needed. And as we got closer, there was like a plan B that really came to mind for me that made a lot of sense. And it was kind of like a two-step plan. Step one was you're going to have to draft somebody at 10. And that guy's going to have to hit the ground running. So you're going to want to have somebody with a refined route tree, somebody who really knows how to get clean releases off the line, somebody who knows how to run crisp routes, who can cut well, somebody who can make plays with the ball in his hands. To me, Garrett Wilson became the obvious choice because I think he's going to be able to be a plug and play guy. But that's not going to be enough. Is Garrett Wilson going to produce what an elite receiver is? Is Garrett Wilson going to produce at the level of an elite receiver? It might be a lot to ask as a rookie. He can get you part of the way there. But how do you make up for that gap between a rookie and Garrett Wilson and an elite veteran receiver? You improve the run game. So how do you improve the run? Well, you could get an extra offensive lineman or two, but Jets already have pretty good run blocking. I think the way you improve the run game is you add a star running back. And if you're a longtime listener, you know I'm a little skeptical on the idea of how much of a difference a running back can make. But there was an exception in this year's draft. There's always an exception. You have to be nimble. You have to be able to see where guys are exceptional talents. And to me, there was one guy who stood out above all others. And I liked Kenneth Walker out of Michigan State, but to me, Breece Hall was the top back in this class. And he's like the guy in this class. If there's going to be somebody who's a difference maker at the running back position, to me, it's going to be Breece Hall. And the Jets got both. And they executed a plan B. And for me, as I judge a general manager, it's important to be able to execute your plan. It's important to have a plan, first of all. It's more important to be able to execute your plan. But just as important as executing your plan, being able to move on when your plan doesn't work. Because I think, in retrospect, it's pretty clear Joe Douglas did want to add a veteran receiver this offseason. They were in the mix on a lot of guys. We don't know exactly what they offer for Deebo Samuel. The reports on that vary. Some reporter tells you the Jets offered this. Some reporter tells you the Jets offered that. But all the reporters in the know seem to agree that the Jets offered something for Deebo Samuel, and it was something fairly big. Again, the Jets were rumored to be in the mix for Calvin Ridley. We know they made a trade for Tyreek Hill and Hill chose Miami. So pretty clear Joe Douglas' plan A was to get a veteran receiver in here. But he had to move on to plan B. And sometimes plan B trips up general managers. In fact, I think back to the John Idzik era. I mean, there were a number of instances where it seemed like Idzik had a decent plan, but then it didn't work, and he had no plan B. I mean, one example would be Idzik was famous for that 2014 offseason where he did not sign a free agent corner. It was maybe the deepest class of the corner position ever in free agency. Idzik did not sign anybody. The rumors were always that they wanted Vontae Davis from the Colts that year. Then right before free agency began, Vontae Davis re-signed with the Colts, and the Jets were kind of caught off guard. and this is rumors. Listen, I cannot verify this, but this is, you piece together enough rumors, I think you can kind of get a sense of where things are going. And then they kind of, they didn't really know what they were doing, and then they brought in, a little while later, they brought in Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, and for whatever reason, they didn't land him, and that was like it was over. It's actually, I think, like, actually in retrospect, and this was not something I would have said at the time, but the more I think about Idzik, the more I feel like he had a decent plan. He just couldn't implement it, and part of the reason he couldn't implement it was that he wasn't nimble enough. He wasn't able to adapt to his circumstances. I think in Joe Douglas, what you saw in this draft is a general manager who was able to adapt. And now you've set Zach Wilson up where, no, you did not get the number one type of receiver that you were looking for. And listen, I was all off season going crazy about that. A lot of people were upset with me, and Joe Douglas deserved criticism for certain things he did. I'll stand by the criticisms I had of Joe Douglas, but you always have a chance to move on when you miss out. And I think Joe Douglas did a pretty good job responding after maybe he made a few early missteps. And they put Zach Wilson into a pretty good situation. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit more about the way I think the Jets have set Zach Wilson up as we conclude this Friday episode of Locked On Jets. Today we're talking about what the Jets did in the NFL draft, and of course if there was a protein bar draft, Built Bar would be number one overall. In fact, every single team in the NFL would be trying to trade up for Built Bar. The question is, which Built Bar flavor would they be trading up for? Would it be banana cream pie? Would it be raspberry, double chocolate? Would it be something else? At Built Bar, they figure out how to make it delicious. And all bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. But beyond that, they also figure out how to make it healthy. And most Built Bars contain only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, which you can compare to a candy bar. Candy bars have around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs typically. You want to see which Built Bar flavor is for you? Go to Built.com. And when you find the Built Bar flavor you want and go to checkout, use promo code LOCKED15. That'll get you 15% off your order. Again, it's promo code LOCKED15. It's one word with no space, LOCKED, number 1, number 5, for 15% off at Built, BUILT.com. No general manager wants to leave his young quarterback without a number of quality weapons on offense, and no business owner wants to deal with the hassle of energy decisions. You just want your business to run smoothly and pay a fair rate for power. But coming off the back of one of the highest priced winters of the last decade, if your business was on a purely variable or market rate, you paid out the nose. Many New York business owners switched suppliers out of frustration, but unless they chose alternative pricing options, they're still at risk for a January repeat. Catalyst Power partners with you or your trusted energy consultant to provide a power supply plan that fits your business and your market risk tolerance. They have a suite of options customizable to your business's needs, including options that bundle with or focus on renewable energy. Right now in New York, Catalyst Power is offering an on-site solar solution for your business that requires zero installation, maintenance, or material purchase costs. That's right, no CapEx costs for you. To sweeten the deal, qualified businesses could be eligible for up to 6 months of at-cost energy supply from Catalyst Power. Go to catalystpower.com/lockedonjets to learn more. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. We're talking about what the Jets did in the 2022 NFL Draft, offering some thoughts a week out. The more I think about what the Jets did, the more I approve of the plan. And part of the reason I approve is you can really see the coaching staff and the front office working together. In the last segment, I discussed how the Jets were nimble, how they moved on from their number one plan of trying to acquire an established receiver, and they found Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. Well, I think this shows the way the coaching staff and the front office are working together. Because if you look at Mike LaFleur's offense, the Jets really did not have the pieces last year to implement it. In fact, that was one of the things I did not understand, because early in the season, it became clear that Mike LaFleur really wanted to run the ball. They wanted to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, and they're running Ryan Griffin and Tyler Kroft out there. And I'm sitting there saying, at the beginning of the offseason, I'm sure Mike LaFleur mentioned he wanted to run 2 tight end sets. So how is this the best you can do at that spot? Well, of course, this year the Jets went out and they got C.J. Uzomah and Tyler Conklin in free agency. So you'll be able to run. They'll run as many 2 tight end sets. And listen, let's not overstate how many 2 tight end sets the Jets are going to run. The top teams in the NFL, even the teams that love 12 personnel, they run it about 30% of the time. But it's going to be a part of the Jets' offense, and they'll be able to run it effectively this year. But beyond that, of course, LaFleur's off that Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. And we all know Kyle Shanahan. He wants to run the ball. He wants to run the ball. He wants to wear the other team out. And he wants to put his quarterback in easy situations. It's no accident that the 49ers have gone to the Super Bowl once and almost made it back a second time in the last 3 years with Jimmy Garoppolo playing at quarterback. Is it because Jimmy Garoppolo is a great quarterback? Well, of course not. I think anybody who watches him knows that. But they managed to put him in easy situations. They managed to not put him in those 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10 situations. And they managed to keep him in the game. That also goes back to how they play defense. But Garoppolo's not in many situations where he's down 14 near the end of the third quarter. Because if you look at the times interceptions happen, they usually happen when the team's in distress. As much as interceptions are the product of bad decision making from quarterbacks, they're also the product of game situations. Interceptions happen more frequently when you're behind. They happen more frequently when you're behind in the second half, and they happen even more frequently when you're behind big in the second half because your quarterback understands that sometimes you got to take a gamble. That's a spot where you got to roll the dice a little bit to try and make something happen. You try and keep your quarterback out of those situations, especially a quarterback who's had those issues with like Zach Wilson early last season. Now, Zach did clean up the turnovers a little bit near the end of last season. Or he actually cleaned up the turnovers a lot. He didn't turn the ball over. His last passing attempts, he really did clean up the turnovers. But he still showed you that he's still learning. He's still developing. He's still not that efficient. Or at least he wasn't that efficient of a quarterback even near the end of last season. So you want to put him in as easy a position as possible. And you do that, of course, by improving his receiving group. I think Corey Davis is going to have a bounce back year this year. You've now given him 2 receivers who are high draft picks as well. You've got Elijah Moore and you've got Garrett Wilson. So this is not the group Sam Darnold had to deal with. The Jets gave Sam Darnold no shot. You want to go back far enough, the Jets gave Geno Smith no shot. The Jets have given Zach Wilson a shot with this group of receivers he's going to have to throw to. But hopefully they've also given him a running game. And a running game could be the best friend of a young quarterback. I don't want to compare him to another quarterback named Wilson who developed in Seattle, but Russell Wilson had a pretty good back in Marshawn Lynch. Maybe I'm putting too much pressure on Breece Hall by dropping the Marshawn Lynch comparison, but a good running game can make things a lot easier for a young quarterback. It can help the young quarterback build confidence. It can put him in good situations. It can help make his life a lot easier when you set up play action. Play action reads are pretty simple, and if you run them effectively, you'll get defenders out of position. You give them a lot of easier throws that can help build a young quarterback's confidence. You're not putting him in situations where he's facing 3rd and 11. You're putting him in situations where he's got maybe 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, where there are going to be more options available, where more of the playbook will be at your disposal, or where you may be able to just run the ball, pick up a first down. Zach Wilson's going to have to develop. Zach Wilson's going to have to improve, but you don't want to put Zach Wilson into a situation where he has to carry the team. You want other people to carry the team, and you want Zach Wilson to fill in where you need him. You don't want everything to be on Zach Wilson's plate. And based on what the Jets have done, I don't think they're going to be in that situation this year. And I think they've built an offense that makes sense for Mike LaFleur, where he's going to be able to run the ball. And then once play action opens up, you're going to be able to get the ball down the field to receivers. I think there's just a lot here that makes sense. There's a lot here that suggests to me this is a good plan. Good plans don't always work, but if you're going to have success, you typically need a good plan in this league. And I think that the Jets have shown through the draft that they have a good plan. Anyway, that's all for today. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, if you enjoy the show, subscribe to it. You'll never miss an episode. Give the show a 5-star review if you enjoy it on your favorite podcast source, or give this episode a thumbs up on YouTube. Helps the channel out. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll be back next week to talk more Jets.